or a concern or sorrow that you wish to share with this community, now is the time to. They are yet too tender to speak aloud. Let us hold all the joys and sorrows in this room in our hearts and minds so that our friends do not carry them alone. Please join me in a few moments of silence as we do so. Blessed be.
As often happens when I have been forced to name a theme for a sermon in advance, as it gets closer, I panic, which is not a great sign when the theme is courage. But as I was dealing with my own panic about finding the courage, I remembered the great literary heroes who inspire me in this regard, Frog and Toad. I can always see myself in their antics and their friendship. I have wondered if I am brave. Yesterday, I wondered. Since I was a child, I have talked to myself. Maybe some of you do that too. I am not afraid. And most of all, I have been blessed by friends and fellow congregants who lend me their courage, even when they aren't always sure of it themselves either. It helps to have brave friends. It helps. I would say it makes all the difference in the world to be in community with others who are also striving to live with heart, to have courage, to belong. At UUSC, every day we are inspired and emboldened by brave friends. The grassroots partners who are among the most affected in our world by horrific violence and persecution in places like Honduras and Myanmar, by the refusal of wealthy nations like our own to welcome the stranger who has no nation, no security, no hope, and by the climate crisis, which has devastated islands and coastlines, destroying homes and whole communities of mostly indigenous people. I saw in one of the reports last month of the global climate strike that youth in Kiribati and the Solomon Islands walked into the water that is not so slowly encroaching on their homes, chanting, "We are not sinking, we are not drowning, we are fighting." UUSC partners in Kiribati and the Solomon Islands are fighting for self-determination as they work to save their homes, their culture, their very identity. They are demanding their right to self-determination in the face of the climate crisis they had scant part in creating. That's some kind of courage. Last year, as part of our work with Indigenous organizations facing climate force displacement, UUSC funded and facilitated a convening which gathered 60 people from around the world to share challenges and solutions. At the end of the convening, the Indigenous leaders presented a declaration, a set of shared principles to guide advocacy and activism. Our partner, Ecological Solutions Foundation in the Solomon Islands, has used the declaration they created in the national climate change conferences that are happening there. And our local partners in Fiji are using the declaration to help shape the planned relocation guidelines that are being developed in Fiji. Frankly, for me, it is hard to find my courage when I think of our partners or the youth in Kiribati and other South Pacific islands walking into the water to witness to their fight for their homes and their cultures. And that is really why I am talking today about common courage. Common courage. I do not want you to leave today and think to yourself or tell somebody who you might be speaking with that she was talking about someone else. I am not talking about someone else. I am talking about you, and I am talking about me. Calling us to common courage, the kind of courage that calls us to drop our defenses and acknowledge that we are all connected, we all belong, we are interdependent, which means we are dependent on one another. Common courage invites us to imagination, the rejection of cynicism so that we can imagine something more, and the common courage to do the next thing. Common courage is the only courage we need to live our values in the world, to build a better life for all people, to help create the common good. The courage to acknowledge our interdependence and indeed our dependence, the courage to imagine what more is possible, and the courage to take the next step toward building the common good. So first, though it sounds pretty straightforward, it takes courage to acknowledge interdependence. We work hard pretending that we are independent, that we don't need anything from anyone else. And our reluctance to acknowledge this, our interdependence, our dependence, or fear of living in that truth, is what leads to all the ways we disconnect from each other. And this, I believe, is the thing most of all that makes it possible for us to do harm to one another and to others. It's easy to see this in the extreme. Leaders who vilify migrants fleeing violence and poverty, freeloaders. That's a great word that kind of puts interdependence and dependence in a bad light. Our own president has gone far in his efforts to vilify migrants. They're not people, they're animals. In Myanmar and other places, it's not so different. Leaders in Myanmar, including many Buddhist monks, call the minority Muslim population there vermin. They aren't us. They have nothing to do with us, except that they're a danger to us. The only way they justify putting children in cages, and by the way, not so great putting adults in cages either, the only way they justify this kind of behavior is through this utter disconnection. It has nothing to do with me, nothing to do with us. Some would say, in more traditional faith, that this is the very definition of sin. I like that definition. How much harm comes from denying that we are one human family inhabiting one living planet? How much harm? We hear it in the stories of the children on our own border. Their trauma, their loss. One little girl made it perfectly clear, speaking to her pain and fear at being separated from her parents. She said, "I can't feel my heart." Even those of us who do not support putting children or adults in cages have to remind ourselves that we are all connected, dependent, and interdependent. We, all of us in this room, need to remind ourselves, to stop ourselves when we fall into thinking and behavior that leads to disconnection, and protecting ourselves from the suffering that's going on all around us. we need to remember that all means all. All belong. We belong to one another. We can't turn our backs, even when our own comfort is threatened. Our dependence and interdependence is often a source of comfort, but it is also inevitably difficult because it asks something of us. Acknowledging our dependence and interdependence means we are accountable for each other. We don't have to do everything, but we must do something. So, second, for common courage, is imagining something more, a new path, a changed heart. And this requires courage. It is much easier to sink into a cynicism that requires no imagination and, frankly, is lazy. Nothing's going to change. Nothing ever does. It's foolish to think that my small action is going to actually make a difference. The essence of the message, as I heard it from the youth leaders of the global climate strike last month, was this: you are called to imagine what is possible. We will not let you get away with your tired cynicism anymore. In the reading, Rebecca Solnit thanks the youth leaders for being unreasonable. I love that. If she says, by reasonable you mean following the rules. In this sense, your being unreasonable is what they always say when structures of power are challenged. When youth challenge their elders, when indigenous leaders challenge industry and demand that they stop destroying community sources of water, when congregations challenge the authorities and regulations by welcoming people into sanctuary. Our lack of imagination is a tool of empire. It is how power gets away with conceding nothing. And again, the climate strikers, the youth leaders are calling us to something more. They have the imagination. They are calling us to a new way. They know it won't be easy. Imagining something more takes courage because it asks something of us. I have seen courageous imagination in indigenous water defenders who are risking everything to protect their community's access to clean water. In February, we got a call at UUSC from some of our partners in Honduras asking for our help. The government was charging indigenous leaders for their protests against the mining company that is destroying their home and their health. UUSC's Reverend Kathleen McTeague got on a plane and sat in witness in that courtroom as we back home sought to get the attention of people in power, making it clear to those in that courtroom that the world was watching. Happily, the charges were dismissed. I'm sorry to report that since then, there have been more arrests, and 12 additional protesters are now being held in prison indefinitely, awaiting trial on trumped-up charges. They are there because they know they are accountable for each other, interdependent, connected, they belong, and they understand and imagine that there is another way they can be in the world. Another way is possible. For them, as you can hear, the cost is very high. And that, I think I have to say, is uncommon courage. Mostly, we do not risk imprisonment for protest against corrupt systems or unjust laws. I say mostly because, as you probably know, Scott Warren from the Arizona organization No More Deaths, also one of UUSC's grassroots partners, is facing a second trial for providing food and shelter to migrants. He could spend 10 years in prison for providing humanitarian aid. We didn't know that leaving water in the desert or giving a hungry person food would require uncommon courage. But we have to understand that sometimes our common courage will ask even more of us. Courageous imagination asks us to be unreasonable. And as Solnit implores, don't listen, don't stop, don't let your dreams shrink by 1 inch. Don't forget that this might be the day, the year that we rewrite what is possible. That will never happen if we have not imagined something more. The third thing I believe is required for common courage is to take one more action for the common good. Take the next step. Do one more thing. It might be the wrong thing. If it is, we'll need to take another. If it's the right one, we'll probably need to take another one too. Courage, though, more than anything else, is doing the next thing for the common good. Find the next right thing for you and do it. I don't know what your next move toward building the common good, creating justice is, but I'm here and I travel around the country visiting congregations to share the work of UUSC because I believe becoming involved in our work as a supporter and an advocate is a very important and effective way to take that next step, to do the next good thing. And we work hard at UUSC to offer meaningful and simple things. Sometimes it's as easy as an online petition or a visit to a legislator, or some are able to volunteer at the border. We hope all of you will want to become members and support our work. In this congregation, I know there are countless next things that you can do as well in support of restorative justice and racial equity, to the reproductive justice work that lives here. What are the other areas of work that you all are planning your next step toward justice in? Smile is a step. Are there other things that we should lift up and acknowledge? Your work with, pads, helping provide shelter, and your work with the statewide advocacy organization, which I think I have the name right, UUNI? Y'all know what UUNI is? Some people don't know what UUNI is. Unitarian Universalist Action Network of Illinois. There are some folks here who would be glad to tell you more about that. Would you wave your arms? Thank you. I hope that this week you will decide